Absolute versus relative paths. Before we start talking about absolute and relative paths, let's make sure we understand the general meaning of absolute and relative words. Absolute means distance from a certain fixed absolute point. Relative means distance from a relative point. Now let's say from my home to the office there is a 10-mile distance. And between my home and office, in 4 miles there is a Starbucks coffee shop, and in 7 miles there is a sandwich place. If I use my home as an absolute starting point, then absolute distance will always be to coffee shop 4 miles, to sandwich place 7 miles, to office 10 miles. Now, how about relative distance? Well, that all depends on where is the relative point. If we use a coffee shop as a relative point, then relative distance will be to home 4 miles backward, to sandwich place 3 miles, to office 6 miles. If we use sandwich place as a relative point, then relative distance will be to home 7 miles backward, to coffee shop 3 miles, and to office 3 miles. And again, to recap, absolute means distance from a certain fixed absolute point. Relative means distance from a relative point. Absolute and relative terms are used in many places, in temperature, in distance measurement, and we also use it in file systems to specify a location of a file or directory. Absolute path in Linux file system means the location of a file or directory when root directory is used as a fixed absolute point. Absolute path always starts with slash. With absolute path we have to specify the full path, all the way from the root folder. Let's take this file as an example. /movies /fantasy /1080p /hobbit.mp4. This is our file that we're going to use as an example. Absolute paths in this example are going to be to the movies folder. This is going to be /movies. To the fantasy folder, it is going to be /movies /fantasy. And note that it doesn't matter from where I go. With absolute path, it doesn't matter where I'm standing right now. It doesn't matter what PWD show me. Let's say 1080p, the location to absolute path to 1080p is going to be /movies /fantasy /1080p. This is going to be full path to the 1080p folder. How about relative path? The relative path is going to depend on where I'm standing right now. Depends on the relative directory. So let's assume I'm in a root directory. In this case, relative path to movies directory is going to be just cd movies. So the movies is without slash. That's a big difference. And we go back to slash. And relative path to a fantasy directory is going to be movies fantasy. And let me come back to root. And relative path to 1080p folder, it's going to be movies fantasy 1080p. Now, what if the relative point is movies directory? What I mean if I'm inside movies directory? So the relative path here, it's going to be to the fantasy folder. It's just cd fantasy / without slash in the beginning. And let me come back to movies folder. Relative path to the next folder, which is 1080p, it is going to be cd fantasy 1080p. Now what if I'm already inside a fantasy folder? Let me go inside the fantasy folder using absolute path. So in this case, relative path to the movies directory, it is going to be cd ... Now why ... Because ... means previous directory. Movies is in the previous directory. Yeah. And let me come back to fantasy folder. How about 1080p? The relative path to the 1080p folder, it is going to be just 1080p. Now, if I'm inside 1080p folder already, what is going to be a relative path to the movies folder? It is going to be dot dot slash dot dot. So twice dot dot. Why? Because it's 2 folders back. And let me come back to the 1080p folder. Now, relative path to the fantasy folder, it is going to be just dot dot. Now note that I can navigate either using absolute or using relative path. It is up to me. It's up to my choice whether I want to use an absolute or relative path. In both cases, it is going to work. Please make sure to rewatch this video a couple of times if it doesn't make a full sense yet. Now let's do a couple of challenges to solidify our understanding of absolute and relative paths in Linux. We'll wait 5 seconds before showing you the answer. So feel free to pause the video after you see a question and take your time to answer yourself with no time pressure. Challenge number 1. The question is, if I am located in a home directory, how do I see content of config.txt file in /home/panda directory with an absolute path and with a relative path? I'll need 2 answers. And the answer it is going to be with an absolute path cat/home/panda config.txt, because our file is located in a /home panda and we're using absolute path. You should always pay attention to the slash in the beginning of a path, because if it starts with slash, then it's an absolute path. The relative path in this case, it is going to be just panda config.txt. Why? Because I am already inside the /home directory and I can just access it with panda config.txt. Challenge number 2. The question is, if I am located in a /tmp folder, how do I see a content of resolve.conf file in an /etc directory with an absolute path and with a relative path? And the answer is going to be with an absolute path cat/etc resolve.conf. This is going to be the answer for the absolute path. For the relative path, it will be cat/etc resolve.conf. Why? Because dot is going to take me 1 directory back, which is basically it will take me to root directory, and inside root directory I have an etc folder, and inside etc resolve.conf file. Okay, challenge number 3. Now this one will be more difficult, so you should definitely pause that video and take your time to answer it right. The question is, if I'm located in a home panda directory, how do I see a content of messages file in /var/log directory with absolute path, with relative path? And the answer will be with absolute path /var/log/messages. And I do see a lot of content here. Now let me clear the screen. And how do I access it with relative path now? So it will be cat.var/log/messages. Why? Because dot is going to take me to home. Two dots are going to take me to back to root directory, and inside root directory I have var folder, and inside var I have log, and inside it I have messages file. So basically 2 dots repetitions are going to take me back to the root directory, and inside root I'm gonna go to var log messages. Thank you so much for watching this, and I hope you found it very useful.